When we think of genocide, the Holocaust often comes to mind first. The terrible time during World War II when millions of Jews and others were killed by Nazi Germany. It's one of the most well-known tragedies in history. But there are other genocides equally devastating in their brutality that remain hidden in silence and forgotten. These atrocities took millions of lives, erased cultures, and left legacies of pain that persist today. Join us in this video as we uncover 5 genocides that, although forgotten, were incredibly brutal and caused massive devastation.
Welcome to Unveiled History.
In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire, which ruled over parts of modern-day Turkey and surrounding areas, was crumbling. World War I was raging, and the Ottoman government, led by the Young Turks, saw the Armenian population, mostly Christian and living in eastern Turkey, as a threat. They accused Armenians of siding with Russia, an enemy in the war, even though most Armenians were ordinary citizens with no role in the conflict. Starting in 1915, the Ottoman authorities began a campaign to eliminate the Armenian population. It started with arrests. On April 24, 1915, hundreds of Armenian leaders, writers, teachers, priests were rounded up in Constantinople, now Istanbul, and killed. This was just the beginning. Soon, the government ordered the deportation of entire Armenian communities. Men, women, and children were forced from their homes and marched into the Syrian desert. These were called death marches because so many died along the way. People were starved, beaten, or shot. Others died from exhaustion or disease. Villages were burned, and survivors were often sent to concentration camps, where they faced more torture. By the time it ended, estimates say 1 to 1.5 million Armenians were killed, about half the Armenian population in the Ottoman Empire. The Turkish government still denies this was a genocide, calling it a wartime necessity. But survivors' stories, photographs, and documents from the time tell a different story. Entire families were wiped out, and Armenian culture was nearly erased from the region. Those who survived were scattered across the world, creating a diaspora that still carries the pain of this loss. In the early 1930s, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin's rule. Stalin wanted to control agriculture to fund his plans for industrialization, so he forced farmers to give up their land and join collective farms. Many Ukrainians resisted, especially small farmers called kulaks, who valued their independence. Stalin saw this resistance as a threat to his power and decided to crush it. The result was the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions of Ukrainians. In 1932 and 1933, Soviet authorities seized crops, livestock, and even seeds, leaving people with nothing to eat. They set impossible quotas for grain production. People starved in their homes, on the streets, and in the fields. Some resorted to eating grass, bark, or even their own dead. The Soviet government blocked aid, sealed borders to stop people from fleeing, and arrested anyone who spoke out. Estimates vary, but historians believe 3.5 to 7 million Ukrainians died, about 1 in every 5 people in the region. Entire villages became ghost towns. The Soviet Union denied the famine for decades, and even today some dispute whether it was a deliberate genocide or a tragic policy failure. But survivors' accounts describe a calculated effort to break the Ukrainian spirit, targeting their culture and identity. The Holodomor is often overshadowed by other Soviet atrocities, like Stalin's purges, or by the Holocaust, which happened soon after. Ukraine's struggle to have it recognized as a genocide has also faced resistance from Russia. Yet for Ukrainians, the Holodomor is a wound that still shapes their fight for independence and identity. In just 100 days in 1994, Rwanda, a small country in East Africa, became the site of one of the fastest and most brutal genocides in history. The conflict was between two ethnic groups, the Hutu majority and the Tutsi minority. For years, tensions had been building due to colonial policies that favored Tutsis and later Hutu-led governments that oppressed them. When a plane carrying Rwanda's Hutu president was shot down on April 6, 1994, it sparked a massacre. Hutu extremists, backed by the government and military, organized a campaign to wipe out the Tutsi population. Radio stations broadcast hate, urging Hutus to kill their Tutsi neighbors. Armed militias called Interahamwe went door to door with machetes, guns, and clubs. Men, women, and children were hacked to death in their homes, schools, and churches. Some Hutus who refused to kill were murdered too. The world watched as an estimated 800,000 to 1 million people, mostly Tutsis but also moderate Hutus, were killed, about 1 in every 10 Rwandans. What makes the Rwandan genocide so shocking is how little the world did to stop it. The United Nations had peacekeepers in Rwanda, but pulled most of them out as the killing began. Countries like the United States and France hesitated to intervene, afraid of getting involved in an African conflict. Survivors hid in swamps, attics, or mass graves, pretending to be dead. When the Tutsi-led Rwandan Patriotic Front finally stopped the genocide by taking control of the country, the damage was done. Rwanda was left in ruins, with survivors facing trauma and a divided society. This genocide is often forgotten because it happened in Africa, far from Western attention, and because it was over so quickly. But Rwanda's recovery through justice, reconciliation, and rebuilding shows the strength of its people, even after unimaginable loss. In 1975, a communist group called the Khmer Rouge, led by Pol Pot, took over Cambodia. They had a radical vision: to create a classless,
rural society by erasing all traces of modern life.
They called it Year Zero. Cities were emptied and millions were forced into labor camps in the countryside. Intellectuals, professionals, and anyone seen as elite, even people who wore glasses, were targeted for death. The Khmer Rouge wanted to rebuild Cambodia from scratch, but their plan led to one of the worst genocides of the 20th century. From 1975 to 1979, an estimated 1.7 to 2 million Cambodians, about 1 in every 4 people, died from starvation, forced labor, disease, or execution. The Khmer Rouge turned schools into prisons, like the infamous Tuol Sleng, where thousands were tortured and killed. Mass graves, known as the killing fields, were filled with bodies. Families were separated, and traditional Cambodian culture, music, religion, education was destroyed. The regime targeted ethnic minorities, like the Cham Muslims and Vietnamese, as well as anyone suspected of disloyalty. When Vietnamese forces invaded in 1979 and overthrew the Khmer Rouge, the world finally saw the scale of the horror. Skeletons littered the fields, and survivors told stories of unimaginable cruelty. The Cambodian genocide that took place during the Cold War, when global attention was on superpowers like the United States and the Soviet Union. Cambodia's small size and distance from Western media also kept it out of the spotlight. Today, Cambodia is still healing, with trials for Khmer Rouge leaders continuing decades later. In the 1860s, the Russian Empire sought to expand its control over the Caucasus Mountains, home to the Circassian people, a predominantly Muslim ethnic group with a vibrant culture of oral traditions, music, and clan-based societies. The Circassians resisted Russian conquest for decades, but Tsar Alexander II's campaign in the 1860s turned resistance into annihilation. The Circassian genocide, or Tsitsekun in their language, was a systematic effort to erase their presence through mass killings, ethnic cleansing, and forced deportations. Russian troops razed villages, burned crops, and slaughtered civilians. General Grigory Zas, notorious for his cruelty, described Circassians as subhuman filth, impaling victims and mutilating bodies to terrorize survivors. By 1864, the Russian military forced hundreds of thousands of Circassians on death marches to the Black Sea for deportation to the Ottoman Empire. Overcrowded ships, often called floating coffins, led to countless deaths from disease, starvation, or drowning. Estimates suggest 1 to 1.5 million Circassians died, up to 95% of their population. Survivors were scattered across the Ottoman Empire, forming a diaspora that still fights for recognition. Russia resettled Circassian lands with ethnic Russians, erasing their cultural footprint. The 2014 Sochi Olympics, held on the site of the genocide, and global awareness remains low. These genocides are not just historical events. They are wounds that shape the present. In each case, a group of people was targeted because of their ethnicity, culture, or beliefs. These acts were carefully planned and carried out using terrible methods like death marches, starvation, and mass killings. Millions of people died, families and communities were destroyed, and entire cultures were almost wiped out. But unlike the Holocaust, these genocides are often called forgotten because they don't get as much attention around the world. Learning about these forgotten atrocities can be incredibly challenging, but it's crucial for understanding the full scope of human history. Which of these genocides, or perhaps another you know of, do you believe we, as a global community, must never forget? Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. If this video helped shed light on these critical events for you, please give it a like to help others find it, and subscribe to our channel for more vital historical deep dives.